Alexei Nikolaev came back to himself with his helmet twisted into the couch padding and the straps biting his hips. The lander creaked around him, metal settling into regolith like a ship into sand. His head throbbed. One glove was gone. He waited for the hiss of a leak, the shrill tone of dropping pressure, the quick route from accident to vacuum. For a few heartbeats there was only the scratch of his remaining glove on the panel as he pushed upright. The gauge needle sat low. Atmosphere thin, but there. Oxygen partial pressure acceptable. Suit integrity mostly green. His right hand was bare to the wrist seal, but the suit shell around it still held. He breathed in, breathed out. Air moved. Every rib ached. Half the cabin lights were dead. That was fine. He knew the layout by touch. Training drills clicked through his head, loose pieces of procedure he grabbed the way a drowning man grabbed anything that floated. Inventory, report, diagnose, try. He reached for the mission logbook clipped beside the left cluster. The strap had snapped. The book lay under the flight computer, wedged in a crack. He dug it out with his left hand, fingers stiff inside the glove. He flipped past launch, translunar injection, the long mid-course coast where his handwriting had relaxed, and he'd scribbled private jokes no one in Baikonur would ever read. He found the first blank space and put the pencil down. Landing, hard, he wrote. Guidance lost vertical velocity call at 30 meters. Manual thrust, left leg broken on contact. Descent engine cut late, hull intact, cabin pressure holding low. Power bus alpha offline, beta 50%, orientation unknown, tilted, nose down. Tight, upright letters, training hand. He listened. No voice in the headset, no beeps from Earth. The crash had killed the high-gain antenna. Maybe he could coax something out of the backup whip later, if the cable was whole. His glove moved over the panel, feeling for wrongness. One gauge lay flat against its stop. One surface that should have been smooth felt rough. The cabin wall pressed into his shoulder at a strange angle. He worked the checklists. Hatch, radar altimeter, valves, what was broken, what he could still trust. The lander sat nose down. One leg was buried deep, no obvious breach. Power was bad. Life support was worse. Numbers on small dials all wrong. Oxygen, water, scrubber capacity, battery charge. He tallied them in the margin. Projected survival, 2 days, maybe 3, assuming no further loss. No rescue possible in that window. Recommendation: use remaining time for maximum data return. His hand shook once, then steadied. Training never covered what to write after a line like that. What you were supposed to be when the mission had already failed and you were still alive. He flipped to a new page. Nikolaev contingency log, he wrote. For whoever reads this, will record system behavior and physical condition until unable. The cabin camera hung above his head, a unit with a heavy shielded magazine bolted to a bracket. One bolt had sheared, but the others held. He thumbed the mechanical start lever. A faint tick answered as the spring pulled the film through. In his imagination, the camera hummed. In reality, it was almost silent. It would be real only if anyone ever bothered to develop the film. He turned his head to the little triangular window. Outside, grey dust sloped away. No Earth in sight, just the curve of horizon. No flag, no company. He finished the entry and went back to work. Time passed. He slept in strapped bursts so he wouldn't slide out of the couch. Dreams smelled of rocket fuel and steel shop air. Waking got harder. On the second day, his writing slowed. Rationed food and water per survival protocols. Headache moderate. Weakness increasing. No external contact. Antenna fix impossible with current tools. Power bus alpha remains dead. Beta at 30%. Cabin pressure falling slowly. Leak not located. Regulator at maximum. He ran his palm along seams, feeling for drafts he couldn't feel through the glove. Tiny scraps of paper near joints never fluttered. The air was too still to play that game. Everything he tried felt like pretending to solve a problem already decided. The scratching started on the third entry. At first he blamed cabin noises, metal cooling, load shifting. It came once, like a fingernail outside the wall, then nothing, then again somewhere else. He stopped writing. His own heart made more noise in his helmet than anything outside. He waited. There, a small drag and tap, delicate, moving along the outer skin. He forced his hand back to the log. New phenomenon. Intermittent scratching on exterior hull. Location variable. Sounds like small tool or hard object on metal. No corresponding accelerometer impacts. Likely regolith movement from thermal cycles or structure settling after crash. Clean, simple language. The way an engineer left notes for another. Life support sagged. He filled lines with numbers sliding past red lines and not killing him. He described the first time he passed out and woke up again, still breathing. Later, he described the first time he didn't. Nikolaev contingency log, later entry. The words spaced wide across the page. His gloved hand held the pencil. His bare hand, the one they'd trained him never to expose in thin air, lay limp at his side. Regulator failed. Cabin pressure below survivable range. Oxygen partial pressure near zero. Physical perception. No urge to inhale. Chest motion absent. Consciousness clear. Heart slow but present. Motor control intact. No apparent hypoxia. Between those lines his body felt wrong. The habit of breathing twitched in his muscles, a ghost impulse. His chest stayed still. He tried to draw in air. None came. The urge to gasp never rose into panic. The scratching came more often now. Short strokes along the hull, as if whatever made the sound was feeling its way. Sometimes it stopped directly behind his head, on the wall just past the cushion. Thin metal separated him from vacuum and whatever lay against it. He thought about knocking back. He didn't. Instead, he wrote, "External activity continues. Contact points move. No impact or drilling. Feels like adjustment, as if something is aligning with internal structures." The pencil dug deep on the last word. He eased his grip. He had to angle his wrist so the bare skin wouldn't touch metal. Drill instructors in his head barked about sealing gloves and helmets. Nothing good came through. He couldn't fix the missing glove. The scratching didn't stop. Time in the log dissolved. He tracked the swing of exterior temperature by the creak of walls. No sunrise, no sunset, just thermal indicators sliding one way, then back. He marked the bulkhead with pencil to count sleep cycles. He knew he had gone beyond anything in the medical tables. Rations exhausted, he wrote later. No hunger, no thirst. Mouth dry, but not uncomfortable. No cramps, no weakness beyond expected inactivity. Chest motion absent, consciousness clear, coordination normal, no pain. Somewhere between those lines, he stopped lying to himself. Changes came he couldn't rationalize. He nicked his forearm on a broken panel corner. Skin parted, no blood. Instead, a clear film formed over the wound in a heartbeat, tight and shiny. He wrote texture and appearance and left out the twist in his gut. The sensation turned into careful vibrations scraping through the couch frame, under his seat, near the regulator, along the curve where hull met floor. He pictured something invisible and patient, following pipes and wires the way a mechanic followed a machine's spine. He wrote that too. External agent appears to interact with life support structures. Cabin leak stabilized. Pressure no longer dropping, but readings show near vacuum. Instruments may be failing, or inputs no longer apply to current tissue condition. He had no words for how he felt now. "I no longer feel in the atmosphere I trained for. Skin warmer, fingernails thickening, veins darker. With eyes closed, I can still feel hull shape around me." He paused more often, not from fatigue, but from a hesitation that wasn't his. The scratching stopped one cycle and didn't return. In the silence, spine pressed to the couch, he felt something else. Something paid attention. It didn't speak or send visions. It presented itself like gravity, as a fact. It had moved through the structure into him, through torn glove, through the air that wasn't air anymore. When he focused, he knew its work was almost complete. He also knew it wouldn't force him. The realization came in a single clean line, like a good flight test in sight. It had fixed what was broken in the only way it understood. It had built a version of him that matched the environment outside more than inside. It could keep him like this, anchored to the wreck forever if it had to, or help him travel. There was one narrow space inside his sense of himself where it waited. He understood that if he accepted it fully and stopped resisting, he'd leave one state and enter another. He thought of photographs he was supposed to take. First steps in dust, a flag, smiles in a tiny cabin. Instructors around a mock-up, droning about milestones, as if history were something you could hold. He wrote the last entry with a hand that no longer quite felt like his, and yet moved with ease. I ceased formal counting. Survival time beyond any training tables. I will not die in the expected way. There is a presence here that offers continuation, not human, not hostile. It works on structure. It has been patient with me. His grip shifted. The pencil scratched slowly. His wrist angle changed. I have concluded no rescue is coming. This lander will never lift. No one will arrive before this ends. The choice is between waiting for mental function to fail or accepting the new condition fully. He paused. The pressure in his head eased. The hush felt like a held breath. He finished. I said yes. It will wear me to meet you. He left the pencil on the open page. His hand fell. When I stepped off the ladder, everything felt like training. Foot down, dust up, arm held just right on the leg. The line I'd rehearsed came out on cue, a bridge between the capsule and every living room back home. The crackle in my headset was familiar. The patch of lunar surface could have been the grey box in Houston, scaled up. Low gravity, slow motion, emotions filed and shelved so no one had to see them. The difference was, this wasn't a set. The horizon didn't end in painted walls. The sky was absolute black, and Earth hung there, small and sharp, white swirls over blue. It was beautiful, but that was an observation, not something I had time to dwell on. I had tasks. Buzz climbed down after me. We moved through choreography that had woken us in our sleep for months. Contingency sample, flag, cameras, experiments, checklists on our wrists, voices calm in loop with Houston. Inside the suit, I moved like I was underwater, each step planned seconds ahead. Most of what anyone ever saw of that walk was routine. Good. Routine meant nothing catastrophic. The anomaly came later when we were tired, the timeline had slipped, and the rhythm of the walk had settled in. I just finished checking the seismometer. Buzz was aligning the retroreflector. The surface around us was gentle slopes of dust and rock, little craters, low ridges. With the sun angle, every pebble cast a black knife of shadow. I scanned the area out of habit. Through the glare shield, to the east, something caught the light. Not like rock. A straight, hard line of brightness where there should have been nothing but dust and stone. Calculations spun up. Distance, time, consumables, how far off the traverse line, how much I could bend the rules and keep everyone happy. Tranquility, this is Neil. I went on the loop. I'm moving to survey a small rise to the east. Want a better look at local topology? Capcom cleared me. Minor deviations were expected. I was still inside the envelope. Buzz turned, visor flaring with the sun. You see something? Just want a better view. I didn't point. The fewer explanations on an open line, the better. We hopped toward the rise in that odd lunar gait, small kicks sending us floating a stride at a time. Dust sprayed and fell straight down, arcs that matched numbers I'd memorized years earlier. The rise was low. It took a minute to top. When we crested, the shape beyond came into full view, and every checklist fell away. Something sat half-buried in a shallow depression, several dozen meters beyond our planned limit. It had the rough outline of a lunar lander, but not ours. A battered cylinder descent stage on 4 squat legs. One leg had buckled and dug in deep. The ascent cabin on top was small and angular, painted in colors that weren't NASA. torn panels, ragged insulation. A broken pole lay nearby, square scrap of cloth pressed into the dust. Buzz stopped beside me, his breathing loud on the loop. "That's not possible." I agreed. I didn't say it. The urge to narrate everything for Houston hit a wall. Cameras, recorders, telemetry were all running. 100 men back home listening. 100 more who'd listen later. Even so, some instinct told me to pick my words carefully. "I have an unidentified structure at our 2 o'clock. Range about 60 meters, I reported. Artificial, 4 legs, appears to be a descent stage." "Copy, Neil." Capcom's tone sharpened. "Describe structure. Any markings?" I thumbed the visor magnifier. On the cabin, a red star. Under it, chipped but legible Cyrillic. "Markings consistent with a Soviet vehicle," I said. Repeating, "Appears to be a Soviet lander. Looks like a hard landing, 1 failed leg. Cabin appears intact from here." Silence. Then a new voice, one of the controllers. "Tranquility. Confirm no occupants visible." "Not from here. I'll approach with caution." Houston didn't argue. On the private channel, Buzz muttered, "Nobody told us about this. They might not have known." I believed it for a second. Then I remembered the gaps in our briefings and the national security men standing silent in the back. We moved down toward the wreck. Up close, the damage showed in detail. Shards of metal around the failed leg. Cracked cabin window. Ascent engine bell crumpled like foil. Handholds and ladders different from ours, but clearly human work. My mind catalogued welds and fasteners to keep itself busy. "Mark location with photos," Houston instructed. "Do not enter unless advised." I took panoramas, careful and methodical. Body on autopilot, mind watching from a few inches back. The hatch was jammed but not hopeless. Warped in the crash, handle at an odd angle. Someone had tried to open it from inside and either given up or lost consciousness. "Buzz, Loop B." My voice dropped on the private line. "Stay close, but if this goes bad, you stay outside. You talk like there's a door in the ocean and you're just going to swim through it." He moved to the hatch anyway. I got my fingers under the bent edge and levered. Metal groaned. Dust shook free. The hatch jumped a centimeter. No rush of air. The cabin had been in vacuum for a long time. I forced it wider. Inside, the Soviet lander was a cramped mirror of our ascent stage. Seats, panels, straps, a flight computer with unfamiliar labels. One couch held a body in a faded orange suit, harness still tight. He looked more like someone asleep in a museum than a corpse. His face had lost some color, a little waxy but intact. No swelling, no collapse, no frost. Helmet visor open, pale skin bare to vacuum, lips slightly parted, eyes closed. We'd all seen training photos of bodies in vacuum after long exposure. This was not that. "Houston," I reported. "1 occupant, in his couch, no visible trauma, exposed to vacuum, no apparent decay." Static seethed. Muffled voices overlapped, the sound of people covering mics. I waited. "Copy." Capcom now sounded measured. "Obtain as much documentation as you can within EVA constraints. Do not move the body yet. Confirm suit integrity. Use caution in contact." Suit checks came by reflex. Seals, rings, joints. Gauge on my wrist. Green. No leaks. Surreal that this moment, standing in a dead Soviet lander beside a man who should have been dust, still had to follow procedure. "Watch my lines," I told Buzz. "Anything feels wrong, you call it?" Understood. I stepped in. The couch sat low, angled back. Straps had left faint grooves in the suit. His hands rested on his chest, fingers slightly curled, frozen mid-motion. I leaned close. No frostbite, no burst vessels. Slight darkening under the nails, as if thicker blood had settled. The rest was wrong in how normal it looked. Beside his right hand, clipped to the console, lay a small notebook. Handwritten lines filled it. Cyrillic on the cover. A pencil hung from a string. Our gloves weren't made for delicate work, but I'd spent half my life picking at tiny switches through thick fabric. I eased the clip open and took the book, keeping it against my palm so it wouldn't float. The pages flexed like they'd been written last week. Helmet light caught the most recent lines. Even without translation, the pattern was clear. Numbers, times, technical labels, firm strokes, no tremor. This man had been writing cleanly when he had no right to still be alive. On the opposite panel, bolted to a bracket, sat a small film camera. 16mm, mechanical. I recognized the type. Magazine labeled in the same hand as the log. Transport indicator showed fully exposed. "Houston, I have a logbook and a camera," I reported, both intact, stowing for return. "Copy. Handle with care. High priority items." The notebook went into my sample bag. The camera took more effort. I had to bend metal out of the way to free it, then wrapped it in a spare bag and tethered it to my torso. While I worked, I kept brushing against the cosmonaut. Suit against suit. My glove grazed his sleeve, his harness, the bare skin at his throat where a habit or last act had pulled the zipper down. As I leaned in for the camera, my glove slipped on a patch of fabric and my hand slid. The back of my knuckles pressed against his wrist for half a second. There shouldn't have been anything to feel. Skin in vacuum is dry and frozen. I expected something like old wood left in the sun. What I felt was a warmth that defied the glove's heavy insulation. Not just surface. A faint depth, as if something underneath still held heat. A prickle ran up my arm. A sensation like brushing a live cable shielded in thick rubber. It went straight through glove and bone. I jerked my hand back. My helmet bumped the cabin wall. Dust danced in my lamp. "You all right in there?" Buzz's voice came from the hatch. "Fine, just crowded." I checked my gauge again. Pressure good. Oxygen good. No alarms. I filed the contact next to the glint that started this detour. Anomaly to be thought about later. "Time check," Houston reminded us. "Complete documentation, then head back toward Eagle." I gave the cosmonaut one more long look. His eyes stayed closed. If they'd opened then, I'd know what I was dealing with. They didn't. I backed out with the notebook and camera. Outside, Buzz's visor stayed fixed on the body in the couch. Think they'll ever admit this? They'll have to. Hardware's here. Our film will show it. Our voices recorded it. Saying it made it feel less certain, not more. Back at Eagle, we repressurized, pulled helmets, scratched at our own hair for the first time in hours. That felt more intimate than stepping on the moon. I opened the sample bag and took out the notebook. Worn cover, intact pages, tight Cyrillic script, dates, times, technical headers. Whoever he was, he'd been precise. The last entry sat crowded, as if he'd felt something ending. Buzz peered over my shoulder. "You ever study Russian?" "Enough to recognize numbers and a few curses." I thumbed through. I could pick out oxygen, pressure, durations. The numbers at the top of the last page made no sense. If they were days, he'd lived far past any chart. "We'll need a translator in Houston," Buzz murmured. "We will." My fingers traced the indentation in the last line. The hand that wrote it had been shaky. The camera sat on the floor, wrapped in the bag. I wanted to crack the magazine and look at the film myself, jump ahead of the chain of custody. That would ruin it. I left it alone. We stowed the notebook and camera in a return container beside rocks that no longer felt ordinary. Later, when we fired the ascent engine and left the surface, the Soviet lander shrank below, just another angular shadow. I kept my eyes on the instruments. There was nothing useful in memorizing the exact outline of that wreck. I didn't think about my glove brushing his wrist again until we were on our way home. Trans-lunar coast stretches out. After the initial burns and checks, you run mid-course corrections, system tests, housekeeping. The minutes between get wide. Sleep came in uneven scraps. Cabin lights dimmed, fans hummed, gauges glowed behind my closed eyes. Privacy is thin in a tin can between worlds. Even your thoughts feel like they might leak onto a loop. When I did sleep, I dreamed short, sharp dreams. In one, I was back on the moon, but inside the Soviet cabin. Helmet off, sleeves rolled. The air was too thin to support lungs, yet I wasn't breathing and I wasn't suffocating. My chest lay still, my heart beat slow and heavy. Something worked in the walls and in me, invisible, its a tension like weight on skin. I woke floating against the straps, lungs full, heart steady. Sweat cooled on my neck. For a moment I couldn't remember how the dream differed from the last hour awake. Trouble sleeping? Mike drifted closer, one hand on the hatch frame. Noise. It was partly true. The little ticks and clicks in the cabin took on character if you stared long enough. You'll have the rest of your life to sleep. He pushed off toward a panel. He'd had his own stretch of solitude up there, circling the moon alone. He didn't need mine on top of that. I flexed my left hand, remembering the prickle. It felt normal, warm, cramped from long use. Nothing moved under the skin. If anything had climbed in, it was quiet. I decided whatever happened in that cabin would be dealt with on Earth. That wasn't bravery, it was prioritization. There were enough ways to die in that tin can without inventing new ones that hadn't even shown their teeth yet. We did the last burns. Earth swelled in the window. The capsule turned nose first and we dove. Splashdown hit harder than I'd pictured. Deceleration, slam of water, wild bobbing. The harness bit into my shoulders. Bright dots swam in my vision. Voices outside the hull cut through it. Divers, Navy, shouts and laughter muffled by metal. Seawater should have come next, but inside the sealed capsule, the air still smelled like ourselves. We swapped helmets for clear hooded garments fed in through the hatch. Plastic overalls meant to keep any lunar hitchhiker off the ship. Awkward to wriggle into in that cramped space, but we managed. A raft bumped the hatch. Hands worked the mechanism outside. Light flooded in. It should have felt like coming home. It felt like being passed from one controlled bubble to another. We climbed into the raft, then the helicopter, then the mobile quarantine facility, a narrow silver trailer welded to the carrier's deck. Inside, it looked like a hospital corridor stuffed into an airstream. Metal walls, padded benches, small, thick windows. The door shut behind us with a metallic click. "We're back in the box," Buzz muttered as he dropped onto a bench. He wasn't wrong. Doctors came through an airlock in coveralls, masks, gloves. They moved like mechanics with medical tools. Cuffs, thermometers, syringes, portable EKGs. One introduced himself as Leonard Haskins, chief physician for the Lunar receiving laboratory where we'd finish our quarantine. 40s, lean, hairline chewed away by stress more than age. He moved fast. "Congratulations," he cut himself off. "You'll get plenty of speeches. Right now I care how your body's handled this." He took my pulse manually as well as with a cuff, fingers on my wrist, counting. His brows drew together. "Problem?" I asked. "Your pulse is low for a man who just went through re-entry, splashdown and a helicopter ride." His eyes flicked to the machine. Very regular, very calm. Short of breath? Dizzy? Neither. I felt like I'd gotten off a long flight, not bounced in a capsule. He glanced at another doctor. "We'll run full labs in Houston. Note these readings." They drew blood, checked oxygen saturation, carbon dioxide, electrolytes. Haskins studied the first printouts, tapping one column. "Interesting. My oxygen level was high, carbon dioxide low for the effort I'd just put in. My heart rhythm strip looked like a man asleep, not just recovered from the ocean." He didn't draw conclusions in front of me. He wrote notes and tucked them away. The mobile quarantine trailer, Hornet +3, stayed on the carrier for a while, then got flown trailer and all to Houston. Motion without windows is disorienting. I'd ridden a lot of aircraft. I'd never ridden inside a sealed silver box bolted into one. Inside, life fell into pattern. Eat, sleep, questions, exams. We wrote debriefs from memory, then again with tapes to check. We answered the same questions in slightly different forms. It felt like a maze that kept folding back on itself. How did the surface feel? How did the suit handle dust? Any equipment failures? Then the ones that weren't on any form I'd seen. Describe again the structure beyond the planned traverse. An officer watched me over a transcript. Mark location as best you can. I sketched the landing site, Lem, hills, the flag, then the Soviet lander with my best estimate of distance and bearing. In your judgment, he asked, does the state of the body suggest any ongoing hazard to future missions? That's not my call. He shouldn't have looked like that. Your medical people will have to decide what's a hazard. You felt comfortable entering the cabin. Comfortable wasn't the word. I went in because it was necessary. That satisfied him. The notebook and camera traveled separately to the Lunar receiving lab, sealed. I knew they were somewhere in the same building as our trailer. I thought about the notebook more than the camera. Not for Soviet secrets, for the numbers at the end that didn't match any survival table. Haskins first mentioned the diary 3 days into quarantine. He came in with a slim folder. After the usual checks, he got to the point. We've translated parts of the logbook you found. I've been asked to brief you. Partly because you found it. Partly because some of it may apply to you. My case, huh? He met my eyes. Your blood work is unusual. And consistently so. I want you to hear what's in here and compare it to how you feel. Next day, they brought me into a small conference room inside the lab. A long table, metal chairs, a projector screen. On the table, copies of translated log pages, English typescript beside scans of the original Cyrillic. The handwriting looked neater in print than it had through a scratched visor. Buzz sat at one end, hands knitted. Mike leaned over the pages beside him. Across from us, Haskins, a stocky Defense Department major named David Kearney, and a civilian translator with the cautious air of someone more at home with dictionaries than astronauts. The translator adjusted his glasses. I've prepared a summary of key entries. He nodded toward the papers. The cosmonaut identifies himself as Alexei Nikolaev. Early logs are routine. Launch, mid-course. The descent is troubled but controlled until the final meters, when he loses a leg and impacts hard. Time of crash? Kearney asked. Based on his mission clock about 2 years before your landing. Kearney grunted. So they got there first and hid it. They didn't get there in the way that matters, I put in. He never broadcast a successful landing. From a political standpoint, first is first, Kearney answered. But that's not why we're here. He tapped the pages. Go on. The logs continue for several days after the crash, the translator said. He records system failures, power loss, degrading life support. He calculates remaining oxygen reserves and concludes correctly he can only survive a few days. He flipped forward to pages where the script tightened. After the regulator fails and cabin pressure drops below survivable values, he notes that he remains conscious. He describes his chest stopping, no automatic breathing, yet he stays awake and oriented. His language becomes very clinical. He tracks changes. The room felt smaller. He notes that he no longer feels hunger or thirst despite lack of intake. Injuries close strangely. He hears scratching on the hull. He assumes regolith movement or structural settling. Our external agent, Haskins murmured. He starts a section he calls a contingency log. The translator's finger traced lines. He writes as if someone like us will read this in a lab. He records measurable changes, skin temperature, veins, breathing, or lack of it. He read a passage about nicking his arm and watching a clear film seal the wound, another about testing how long he can refrain from inhaling before distress. Distress that never comes. As the entries go on, he continued, he mentions a sensation of presence, something working through the lander's structure and into him. He does not treat it mystically. He treats it like another system. And the last entry? He concludes no rescue is coming and that of the presence offers continuation if he accepts. His final line is, I said yes. It will wear me to meet you. The words hung between us. Buzz shifted. He's describing a kind of possession. A physical transformation, Haskins countered. From his perspective anyway, the clinical tone makes it more disturbing. Mike rubbed his neck. We told ourselves we'd anchor whatever we saw up there in stuff we could measure. Looks like he did the same. Kearney leaned toward me. So, a man survives beyond all known limits in an environment that should kill him. He records progressive changes while some external factor works on him. Then he accepts it. Years later, you find his body intact. Fair summary? Broadly, the translator answered. Does the diary mention contact with anyone else? Any hint this condition can be passed on? Kearney asked. No, he appears alone. Good, that simplifies things. Kearney's gaze fixed on me. Commander, we need every detail about your contact with that cabin and the body. I thought of warmth under my glove, of eyes that stayed shut, at least to my memory. I brushed against him repeatedly while removing the notebook and camera, I said. One brief touch on exposed skin. It felt like bumping a corpse in a tight space. Haskins watched me. I kept my face neutral. That brings us to your labs. He slid a sheet across. These are your blood gas readings since recovery. Oxygen high. Carbon dioxide consistently low. Heart rate below your training baseline for similar stress. No acidosis. You report no shortness of breath or dizziness. That match your experience? I feel fine. Compared to how you'd expect to feel. I'd expect to be more tired. More winded. I'm not. So you feel better than expected. In that sense, he sat back. I'm not ready to draw a straight line to Nikolaev, but we can't ignore the pattern. Two men, both with unusual tolerance under stress, both having contact with the same environment. He paused. Anything else you've noticed? I hesitated. When I hold my breath, I can do it longer than in training. My chest doesn't burn. It feels like I could let the reflex go entirely if I chose to. I haven't pushed it far. No distress, no panic, Haskins pressed. None. Other anomalies. Once in quarantine, I woke up with a pen in my hand and a page full of Cyrillic. The handwriting didn't look like mine. I couldn't read it. Silence. Even the air system seemed to hold still. Where's that paper? Haskins asked. In my locker. He was gone and back within minutes, sheet in hand. The translator took one look and went pale. These sentences, they match Nikolaev's style, not just language, phrasing. It's as if he continued the diary. What do they say? Buzz asked. Surface composition notes, micrometeorite observations, a line about lunar silence being full of opportunity. I'm almost sure this text isn't in the logbook. It's new. I don't remember writing it, I said. So we have an astronaut whose physiology is drifting, who can tolerate anoxia without distress, and who produces writing in another man's handwriting while asleep. Kearney summed up. We're past ordinary medicine. Haskins focused on me. When you hold your breath and feel that ease, do you ever feel urged to go further, to stop breathing at all? I have the sense I could, I answered, but I don't want to. It feels like a trap door I could open. Something's waiting, but it doesn't push. He nodded slowly. All right. Kearney straightened. From a security standpoint, the prudent course is strict isolation until we know whether you can spread this. And if you treat it as a capability, I asked. His eyes narrowed. Meaning? Something that makes a man harder to kill in certain environments. That conversation belongs in another room with other people. Then consider this. Whatever it is came from a place no one owns. The moon didn't pick a flag. Enough. Haskins raised a hand. We're in speculation. Facts. Nikolaev recorded changes after exposure. Your numbers show early changes. We have no evidence of contagion by normal contact, but we can't rule it out. 4. Buzz added quietly. The presence seems to want consent. I said yes. He makes it a choice. Everyone looked at me again. I need to know how much you're willing to tell us, and under what conditions, before we talk about what happens next. Kearney said. I want to see the film, I answered. Haskins looked up sharply. We haven't shown that yet. You've developed it by now, I went on. I want to see that cabin through his camera before we decide anything. We can arrange a viewing. Haskins's gaze slid to Kearney. But it won't make this easier. Then we should make the decision with full information. The projection room was a converted lab with blackout curtains and a screen at one end. A technician threaded the Soviet film onto a standard projector. I stood in the back with Buzz and Mike. Haskins took a chair. Kearney leaned against the wall. The projector chattered and the first frames jumped up. No sound, just grey images. At first, routine. Alexei in his suit, helmet on, working switches, checking gauges. Young, focused, cabin cramped around him. Then the crash, camera jolt, smears, lights out. When they came back, dim, he hung in his harness at an angle. He tested himself. The panel reached for the logbook. The footage matched the diary. Checklists, notes, slower movement as time passed. He eventually unlatched his helmet and took it off, letting it bump the couch. That alone should have killed a man once the regulator failed. He did it calmly, following a protocol he'd written for himself. Later, the camera caught him asleep, chest rising and falling. In a later segment, the chest stopped. He lay utterly still. His eyes opened. He stared at the overhead, then reached for the notebook and wrote. Frame by frame, his body changed. Veins darkened, nails thickened. The forearm wound closed under that clear film. Then the film ran out of leader. The screen went white for a second, then jumped back to grey. There's a 2-year gap here, the technician murmured. Look at the time code. The mechanism stopped when he died. It shouldn't have had any spring tension left. It started again, I said, when I came through the hatch. On the screen, the view had shifted. I recognized it. Through the cracked window, dust drifting in a shaft of light, my helmet lamp sweeping in. My helmet. I was watching myself enter. I clambered through the hatch, careful, awkward, dust puffing. Visor hid my face, but the hunch of my shoulders was mine. The camera watched me lean over the body, gloved hand reaching for the notebook. Alexei lay as we'd found him, eyes closed, hands folded. As my glove brushed his bare wrist, something changed. On screen, in grainy monochrome, his eyes snapped open. Not a flutter. One frame shut, the next wide, pupils fixed where my face would be. Muscles around them tightened, tracking my movement as I shifted. Then his lids started to lower. 2 frames later, they were shut. After that, he was as before, less than a second. Run that again, I told the technician. He rewound. We watched frame by frame. Buzz whispered a curse. That's not post-mortem twitching, Haskins said quietly. That's controlled. Have we checked for tampering? Kearney asked. We shot it, I snapped. Our camera ran the whole time. No one had time to stage a trick on the moon. Someone could have altered it here. You didn't. He didn't. I nodded at the technician, who looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. I know film. Dust patterns match my memory of that moment. My instinct with a fact like this is simple. Take it in, record it, don't look away. Kearney didn't share that instinct. This can't exist outside this room, he said. You can stamp classified on it, Buzz answered. You can't unsee it. We can control copies. We cut those frames, replace them with a duplicate of a clean sequence. Only those of us here know the original. The rest of the world sees a dead cosmonaut. Nothing more. That doesn't change what happened, I told him. It changes how many people act on it, he countered. Every extra set of eyes is another vector for panic, for foreign intelligence, for bad decisions. You're astronauts. You understand containment. I understand test flying, I replied. If you hide a critical data point because it makes you uneasy, you set someone up to die later. Only if we repeat the configuration, he shot back. We don't have to put anyone alone in a wreck on the moon again. Problem solved. His confidence scraped worse than the sound on a hull. We have more immediate problems, Haskins put in. We have an astronaut changing in ways that mirror Nikolaev, and a handful of others with contact exposure. Whether or not the world sees those frames, we need a plan. I kept staring at the frozen frame of Alexei looking straight into my visor. No madness there, no plea, just awareness and a kind of measuring. Kearney cleared his throat. I'll be blunt. If we treat this like an infection, the safe choice is to keep you here indefinitely until we know you're not a danger. And if you treat it like what it looks like in that diary, I asked, then you're a man with something inside him we don't understand, and that others might want. That doesn't argue for letting you wander. So what do you propose? I'm going to recommend extended quarantine and strict classification, he answered, but you're also the centerpiece of the biggest public relations victory we've ever had. There will be pressure to take you out, show you off. We have to balance that. He looked straight at me. If we let you out, it won't be full freedom. You'll be monitored, examined. You'll keep certain details quiet. If your condition progresses, we revisit confinement. In plain language, I get a controlled life with fuzzy edges, or a cage. More or less. I thought of the last line in the diary. I said yes. His decision had been binary, accept or fade. Mine was messier. Live under watch, or become a specimen in a room with no windows. I won't be your lab animal, I told him. If I can work and live under some kind of terms, I'll cooperate with monitoring and with keeping this contained. If you lock me up, I'll resist however I can. Buzz flicked me a look. Mike stared at the table. That's as honest as you'll get, Haskins murmured. Kearney considered. We can work with that. There will be conditions. I assumed. He turned to the technician. Cut the frames with the eye movement. Keep one original reel under highest classification. Replace the rest. Under supervision, the technician cut the film and spliced in a clean segment. The strip with the opening eyes went into a small metal can labeled in code. It passed from his hands to Kearney's, then to Haskins. For now, that stays here, Haskins said. Locked. Limited access. I pictured some future tech opening that can, by mistake, feeding the strip into a test projector and watching a dead man open his eyes. The image lodged and stayed. They released us from quarantine weeks later. The public part came first. Cameras, microphones, smiles. We walked out into a world that had been watching our faces for days. People reached for our sleeves like contact might rub off some kind of blessing. Parades, speeches, handshakes. It all felt like another simulation, structured, choreographed, risk-managed. Through it all, my body stayed unnervingly calm. Standing in an open car under the sun, crowds pressing close, I waited for my pulse to climb. It stayed low and regular. Breathing came easy even when we pushed through reporters and question after question. If anything, there was distance between what my senses reported and what my body bothered to react to. At night, in hotel rooms guarded by security, I tested myself. I'd inhale once, then stop. Close my eyes. Count. 1 minute. 2. 3. I waited for the burn in my chest, the rising panic that forces the next breath. It never came. Pressure built, but abstractly, like holding back a cough. When I finally inhaled, it felt optional. On one of those nights, I held past any sane limit. Chest still, heart slow and steady, mind clear. Something hovered at the edge of awareness. The sense that I was standing on the threshold of doing what Alexei had done, moving from resistance to acceptance. I let the breath go and sat up. Lungs filled, no punishment, no withdrawal. Whatever was there just adjusted, like a hand loosening without letting go. Back in Houston, after parades and handshakes, monitoring began in earnest. The Lunar receiving lab, built to handle rocks and hypothetical pathogens, doubled as a quiet human study unit. I reported for regular visits with Haskins and his teams. Blood, breathing tests, heart rhythms. The numbers stayed strange. If anything, they settled deeper. Your cells are using oxygen more efficiently, Haskins told me in one session, flipping charts. You're producing less carbon dioxide at a given workload. Tissues tolerate low oxygen with no damage we can see. He tapped a graph. I've never seen a profile like this outside rare pathologies. And the writing? We've got cameras on you when you sleep. So far, only that one episode. Doesn't mean it's over. He sighed. If it happens again, I want it on film. With your consent. You've got cameras in every corner. I assume consent's a formality. His mouth tightened. I'm still a physician. That word matters to me, even if other people treat you like a project. Between appointments, I walked lab corridors under the eyes of security and lenses. Technicians leafed through sample catalogues, adjusted instruments. Most treated me like a visiting VIP. A few looked at me like an interesting slide. One afternoon, leaving an exam, I passed a door left slightly ajar. Inside, a man sat on an exam table in a hospital gown. I recognized him from recovery photos, one of the divers. He swung his legs while a nurse drew blood. A cuff wrapped his arm. Haskins stood nearby, watching the monitor behind the diver's head. I slowed, fussing with a cufflink I wasn't wearing. Through the gap, I caught the numbers on the screen. Low heart rate, high oxygen saturation, low carbon dioxide. They looked familiar. The diver laughed at something the nurse said. His chest barely moved. Later in the hall, I waited for Haskins. Spreading? I asked. He flinched, then relaxed when he saw it was me. We've detected similar anomalies in a few people with direct contact, he admitted. Divers, a tech who handled the camera casing bare-handed, a lab worker who wiped a smudge off a sample bag without gloves. You keeping them here? Some. Some we monitor through routine physicals. He rubbed his nose. Their patterns are milder than yours. Less exposure, maybe. Or maybe the agent chooses how much to invest. The agent, I repeated. If I call it a parasite, I imply one thing. If I call it a symbiont, another, he said. I don't know enough. Agent is honest. What does Kearney want to do with them? As little publicly and as much quietly as he can. Haskins answered. Officially, we're following up lab incidents. In reality, we're keeping the circle small and watching. He glanced down the hallway, then back. He keeps coming back to the same point. If this thing can make people more tolerant of vacuum and anoxia, someone will try to harness it. And if someone will, he wants that someone to be us. Us, I echoed. The flag on your suit, he said. I looked at my hands. Skin looked normal. Nails maybe a fraction thicker. Underneath, the graphs told a different story. You think it's listening? I asked. To us? To this. It responds to environment, he said slowly. It repairs structures. It maintains consciousness in tissue that shouldn't support it. That implies some kind of sensing, whether it cares about what we call politics. He shook his head. I suspect it cares about opportunities. Alexei thought so, I said. More contact points, more pathways. In that case, containment may already be optimistic, he murmured. We walked in a thin silence after that. The offer, when it came, arrived on paper. We sat in a small office with the blinds shut. Kearney laid a stapled stack in front of me. A memorandum of understanding, he said. Between you and a collection of agencies whose initials fill a paragraph. The gist is simple. That would be a novelty. You agree to keep in confidence all information about the Soviet lander, Nikolaev's condition beyond basic technical parameters, the diary's subjective content, and any personal experiences with the agent. In return, those agencies agree not to pursue involuntary confinement, as long as you cooperate with monitoring, avoid certain environments where the agent could spread uncontrollably, and report significant changes promptly. In other words, I keep quiet, show up for checkups, don't show off any party tricks, and you let me live outside a box. That's one way to phrase it. And if I refuse? We classify you as a potential public safety threat, he answered calmly. Invoke emergency powers, move you to a secure facility, long-term observation. No visitors without clearance, no press. You become, publicly, a tragic medical complication if we mention you at all. You do that to the man you've been parading as a hero. The public wouldn't know. We control access. We control narratives. He watched me. You'd be more useful to us alive and cooperative than locked away resentful. That's why I'm offering a choice. And because if you treat me too badly, someone like Haskins might grow a conscience and leak. His mouth twitched. That too. I looked at the pages. Legal language boiled down to a bargain. For the rest of my life, I'd be shared property between myself, my country, and whatever came back with me. I thought of Alexei, strapped in, pencil in hand, weighing a simpler deal. Accept or fade. I still didn't know if that yes had felt like surrender or curiosity. I thought of the diver in the exam room, swinging his legs, of Tex who'd brushed the wrong surface, of Haskins pinned between oaths. I thought of my family, of the life on the far side of this signature, teaching, advising, quiet offices, maybe a farm one day, living with something else inside my skin. I picked up the pen. I'm not going to pretend to like this, I told Kearney. We're not asking you to like it, just to sign. I signed. Years later, after the cameras moved on and newer missions took the headlines, I stood at the edge of a training pool. I'd taken a position mentoring new astronauts, running them through drills. Part of that work used a neutral buoyancy tank where they practiced spacewalks underwater. During off hours, the place was mostly empty. A lifeguard, a tech in a booth, otherwise water and echo. I stood on the tile in a swimsuit, air cool on my shoulders. Reflections from ceiling lights rippled on the surface. I hadn't told anyone why I'd come in without a class. I climbed down the ladder until the water reached my shoulders. Pressure hugged my chest. I breathed in once, out once. Then I inhaled, let half of it go, and slipped under. The world muffled. Light broke into wavering bands. The pool bottom stretched beneath me in pale tiles. I settled on my back on the floor, arms out. I counted. 1 minute, 2, 3, 4. Most people, even trained divers, would have been clawing for the surface by then. Instinct takes over. For me, there was only increasing stillness. No burning, no panic. My chest stayed quiet. Limbs felt light. The presence was there. Not in my head like a thought, not above or below. More like a pattern laid over my nerves. It watched gas balances, tissue states, structural integrity. It didn't care whether air moved in and out, as long as oxygen, wherever it had been stashed, kept doing its job. The trapdoor feeling returned. I knew, as surely as I knew how to stage a burn, that if I wanted, I could let breathing go right then. Join Alexei in whatever equilibrium he'd entered. The agent would hold me. Cells wouldn't starve. My awareness would sit in a new normal. There'd be a price. Maybe I wouldn't be able to go back. Maybe the thin line between my choices and its preferences would disappear. I lay there listening to my own slow heartbeats, weightless in chlorinated blue. Above, through the wavering surface, a figure leaned on the pool edge. The lifeguard or a wandering trainee, features blurred, their chest rose and fell slowly. Long pauses between breaths. The agent didn't nudge, didn't coax, it just waited. Alexei's last line glowed in memory. I said yes. I thought of my wife, my sons, students expecting a lecture next week, the diver, the techs who'd rubbed their eyes after handling a sample bag. I thought about how so far the agent hadn't shown malice. It repaired, stabilized, extended. It also ignored the borders we drew around ourselves. I let the decision settle. I bent my knees, pushed off the tiles and rose. My head broke the surface. Air wrapped my face. I inhaled more out of habit than need. The lifeguard glanced over, then back at a magazine. To them, I'd been under a little long, nothing more. Water ran from my hair. My chest felt the same. I climbed out and sat on the edge, feet in the pool. Droplets fell and made rings on the surface. In that moment, I understood that signing in Kearney's office hadn't been one decision. It was ongoing. Every test I cooperated with, every answer I half gave a reporter, every time I walked past a man with my numbers on his monitor and didn't pull a fire alarm. I hadn't said yes the way Alexei did. I'd said something murkier. I'll live with this, under terms I didn't choose, and I'll try not to make it worse. Whether that counted as resistance or collaboration depended on the story you told yourself. The agent didn't care. It flowed along its own lines, through bone and vessels and structures we hadn't named. It used me to exist in air and water, and in the bubbles we built in space. In that sense, I wore it as much as it wore me. Some nights when the house was quiet and the fans whispered, I'd wake to find my chest perfectly still and my mind as clear as if I'd just finished a checklist. I'd lie there and count, knowing I could continue indefinitely. Each time, I chose to breathe again. The horror wasn't that it had come back with me. The horror was how easy it was to live beside it, fold it into a life, let the world move on while a few of us quietly carried a piece of the moon in our blood. We'd brought back rocks and dust and the image of a flag in grey soil. We'd also brought back something that had waited patiently for someone to open a hatch and reach in. I often wondered in quieter hours how many were out there now. Divers, technicians, maybe one or two under other flags. Living, working, breathing when they felt like it, and not breathing when they didn't. Unaware that somewhere in a dark drawer, a strip of film preserved the moment a dead man's eyes opened and watched the first of us carry his condition home.